Richard Culatta is a father of 4, and his youngest is now 10. The two of them used to read together before bed, but as his son has gotten older, he prefers to read books on his own. So they came up with another way to connect at bedtime, using something that is often considered a parenting taboo, their phones.
We have a shared notepad on our phones, and throughout the day, when we come up with a question, something we don't know what the answer to, we write it down. And so I'm actually going to read off what the list is. This will be totally authentic. Where is the highest place on Earth? What was the history of sushi? Who was the first African-American astronaut? What are electrolytes, right? And then what we do is at night, after he brushes his teeth, we go down and we set a timer for 10 minutes and we pick one of these things and we go as deep as we can in 10 minutes, right? That's the rabbit hole. So we have this bonding moment together. But the lesson that I'm teaching him is that these tools are not just tools for playing games. They are tools to help us be curious learners. And that's an important lesson in our family that we want to convey to our kids.
Welcome to the Why Magazine podcast, bringing you ideas, stories, and voices from Brigham Young University. I'm Whitney Archibald, and today we're going to talk to BYU alum Richard Culatta. He's the CEO of the International Society for Technology and Education on a crusade to help us use digital for good. In fact, that's the title of the book he wrote, Digital for Good, Raising Kids to Thrive in an Online World. I have 5 kids from 9 to 19, and I've read a lot of books and talked to several experts about how to help my kids manage technology. Afterwards, I often end up feeling overwhelmed, more than a little inadequate, and honestly, a little scared about where the world is headed. But although Culatta fully acknowledges the dangers and challenges of technology, there's a whole chapter in his book called Our Digital Dysfunction, his overall message is one of hope. Yes, parenting in the digital age is uncharted territory for most parents, but we are better equipped than we think. And there are a lot of amazing things about growing up in a high-tech world. One of my favorite concepts from the book was the idea of raising our kids to be good digital citizens. So that's the first thing I asked him about.
I like the term digital citizenship. And digital well-being is another term that we use. And they're interchangeable. But the reason I like digital citizenship is that it reminds us that when we're in virtual spaces, we are part of a community. We are not there just by ourselves. And that our actions have impact on those around us, for positive or for negative, right? And so I think that idea of being a citizen, being a virtual citizen, a member of this digital world is a healthy kind of concept to help kids learn, and that they can help make people's lives better by the way they act. And they can also have negative experiences if they're not using their participation in the virtual world in a positive way.
Yeah, so you have identified 5 different elements of digital citizenship. Can you just kind of briefly go through each of those?
Yeah. So there are 5 research-based skills that I think we need all young people to have. They need to be balanced, they need to be informed, they need to be engaged, they need to be alert, and they need to be inclusive. And notice that all of those are things you can practice. None of those are a don't, right? Practice being informed. What does it mean to be engaged? There's a bunch of ways that we can be engaged with our family, with our community in virtual spaces. What does it mean to be inclusive? How do we help create virtual spaces that are welcoming and inclusive of others, right? All of those skills tee up things that we can easily practice.
Yes, and I love that positive approach instead of fear-based. I'd love for you to address that about why there is so much fear. Is it just the unknown?
I think some of it is, right? We're the first generation of parents that have sort of had to go through this experience of teaching our kids how to thrive in a digital world. And so it's new, right? But I also think that there has just been, there's been some misinformation because fear sells, right? But it doesn't actually help our kids be healthier members of the virtual world. And it's not all social media is good, all social media is bad. It's not that simple. In the book, I share a story of a kid who had a rare illness, and she was in middle school and woke up one day and all of her hair was lying on the pillow. And you could imagine, she said, for a middle school girl, could you imagine?
Yeah. Oh.
And there was some, not very friendly reactions at her school. And it was devastating. She ended up finding a group of people in a virtual space that became her support group. And, it may have even saved her life. It gave her the courage to sort of come back and say, hey, I'm confident this is who I am. And, that there are these great stories about people who really thrive by having access to their digital communities. But there's also a bunch of garbage in virtual spaces. There's a bunch of communities that are spewing hate and misinformation, right? So this categorically saying all social media is bad or all social media is good, like that's not helpful. And again, it teaches the wrong lesson. The lesson we need to teach our kids is it depends on who's there and what they're doing. And if we teach that, if you go to places and look for what people are doing, if it's good people doing good stuff, that's great. And that's the lesson we want to teach. And so learning how to use these powerful tools is really essential if we want kids who can grow up to be, amazing leaders and problem solvers.
You talk about the digital world and the physical world being kind of parallel universes. Can you explain what you mean by that?
Yeah, I think it's important that we realize that the virtual world is a very real place. It's a place where a lot of very important, meaningful aspects of our life happen. And it could be that we are connecting with family virtually. I think all of us experienced some of that during COVID. Our family reunions switched to being virtual. It's now, not uncommon to say when somebody's getting married to say, well, will there be a Zoom link, right? Could you have imagined saying a Zoom link to a wedding before?
Right.
Like people would be like, are you crazy? And if you think about other, the way we engage and participate in our communities are largely through virtual spaces. And so I think the point we need to understand, the virtual world is a very real place. It's a very important place. And we have to recognize that while we transition between the physical world and the virtual world, lots of times throughout the day, it's not as simple as just assuming that if we've helped our family or our kids understand what certain norms are in the physical world, that those norms will automatically roll over when they're in the virtual world because the context is different. And so we need to be teaching how to be good people in the physical world and in the virtual world.
I like that you made that distinction because one thing I kept thinking about as I was reading this is like, for those of us who were born into a time where there was just the physical world and that we did not have both, and now we're kind of straddling both, I feel like there's kind of this push and pull. Like sometimes we're in denial about this digital world where we think, oh, if only our kids could grow up in the same time that we had, and trying to make our current reality as close to our experience as we can, which creates kind of this tension, this idea that one is better than the other, instead of allowing them to coexist and figuring out what that new relationship should be.
Yeah, and I think when we think about teaching our kids what our expectations are, for how they act in physical spaces, it's familiar to us, right? I mean, just here's a silly example. We were at a park the other day down the street from my house, and I have 4 kids. So, and there was a plastic water bottle on the ground, and we were walking there. I picked it up. I threw it away. I didn't say anything about it. I didn't make a big deal about it. Now, every time my kid, who was with me at the time, is at the park and he sees a water bottle, he picks it up and throws it away, right? There was an important lesson that I taught there. And so the question that we have to ask is, what's the equivalent of that in the virtual world? And the challenge in virtual spaces is it's a little bit harder to observe, right?
Yes.
Often for kids, it's dad sitting at his computer again. And so we have to be comfortable being overt about what we're doing. Hey, I'll be there in a minute. I'm setting up information about the blood drive that's happening at church. Do you want to come take a look, right? Just simple things like that, making it overt, plays that important role that picking up the piece of trash in the park does. And if we don't think to do that, we are missing out on this very critical opportunity to model to our kids what type of humans they should be in virtual spaces.
Yes, it's harder to have communal activities online.
I mean, maybe, right? So I think my kids would say the other way around.
Okay.
I think my kids would say it's far easier because it doesn't matter where people are physically, they can still engage and participate. When I was writing my book, I had a chance to talk to kids and parents about some of the messages that we share, right?
Yeah.
And one of the messages, that kids said that makes no sense to them is when their parents say, get off your phone and interact with real people, right? And they're like,
yeah.
I'm interacting with 20 people right here, friends, cousins, right? And you're saying, get off my phone to interact. I'm not saying that we should only be plugged in on our phones all the time by any means. That idea that we're not interacting with real people when we're in virtual spaces just doesn't make sense to a kid who's like, wow, I have all my community right here at my fingertips.
Well, and I think that's one of the fears that a lot of parents have is like, oh, my kids aren't going to be developing social skills because they're always on their phones. But they might be developing just different social skills, or Or maybe they're not even that different. There's still
Yeah.
social skills. There's still interactions with people, and they're still building relationships.
Right? We want to start talking to kids about this at a young age. What does balance look like between real, physical world activities and virtual world activities? What types of engagements do we value in virtual spaces or physical spaces? Like, those are all conversations that we need to have. If you're a parent and you read a book and it says the only way you can be safe is to ban all technology, bury the devices in the backyard, if we do that, we're not setting our kids up for success. They're going into a world where they need to know how to be curious digital learners, how to be community organizers, how to work and explore and have connections with other humans that are valuable to them, to have entertainment that is safe and uplifting. Those are skills we have to teach. This is a real story. I was talking to a parent at a sort of a school night that I was speaking at. And she came up and she said, I'm in this wait till 18 or wait till 8 or whatever it is. My kids are never going to have technology. I said, do you think your kids are going to use technology at some point in their life, like when they leave? And she said, well, of course. Obviously, right? And I said, okay, so let me just be clear what you've done. You've said you are going to abstain from being the one to teach all of those norms. When they're in 8th or 9th grade, who do you think they're going to now be learning those norms from? Not you. I don't know about your kids, but when my kids get to high school, the value of what we're teaching, how much they're willing to listen to parents goes way down. And
so you've kind of missed that golden age.
Yes. And it was funny when I was talking to her, she just sort of went white. And she's like, I've just ceded one of the most important lessons to a kid on the back of the bus. And so that's why it's really critical that we start having these conversations with kids at younger ages. That doesn't mean that we just hand a kid a device with full internet access and access to social media. That's not what we're talking about.
Right.
We start at younger ages modeling together. And look, parents do this all the time with other things. We teach our kids to eat healthy, right? We start from a very young age and we say, hey, we're going to eat some foods. We're going to eat some broccoli and we're going to eat some chicken. And, can we have a Twinkie? Sure. But we're going to do it occasionally. And when we've had a balanced diet. When my kids get to high school, I'm not even worried that they're going to be healthy eaters because we've been reinforcing this since they were 6 years old. And that's what we want to do with technology as well. We want to get to a point where I'm not worried anymore because we've modeled it so much that they already know what's an acceptable norm in our family.
Well, and I think, talking again about that perceived conflict between the physical and digital world, sometimes we tell ourselves, well, we weren't parented that way. We don't have these skills. We don't know how to teach digital citizenship. But I think what you just said with the food proves that we do have the skills. We know how to teach children. It's not as different as we think it is.
That's right. And that's the key part, is that we're actually really good at this. Yeah. In all other parts of our kids' life, there are lots of really good strategies that we know as parents. Modeling, talking about this together. We do this with other things. The other part that I'll note is that idea of good parenting starts with this idea of scaffolding, right? Meaning you're starting with a basic skill that a kid can demonstrate, and then we slowly and gradually increase our skills. So here's an example. 2 of my kids have now gotten their driver's license. They've learned to drive.
Oh, yes.
It would make no sense for me to never have had them practice driving and then just hand them suddenly one day the keys to a sports car, right? That would be dangerous. It would be stupid. We do things incrementally. We say, hey, you're going to get a chance to start to drive with us in the car, but we're just going to stay in the neighborhood. Or maybe we start just in a parking lot first, right? And then we stay just in the neighborhood. And then when we get our permit, right, we're following the rules of that, having a parent in the car. And then even when we get our license, we're not going to go jump on a very, very complicated highway to navigate. We're going to drive a little farther until we build this confidence. And that's the same idea with technology. We don't just say, hey, here's a device. I think sometimes parents think that technology is binary. It's either all access or none at all. Every device, whether you have an Android device or an iOS device, you have the ability to turn on parental controls. And so those parental controls say, if you want an app, great, click to download the app and it will ping a parent and you can have a conversation about it, right? Our kids, when they first get a phone, it's a phone with no data plan, right? Because we want to see that they're responsible in balancing their time long before we're going to give them a data plan. And then after they see that, we're like, okay, now you're going to get a data plan, but you're only going to get 3 apps, right? We're not getting YouTube. We're not getting, social media. And then we see how that goes. And then we say, all right, hey, now let's try YouTube, but let's talk about it first. So we gradually make this transition. That's how the brain works. And when we do it that way, we get kids who are very healthy members of the digital world.
Right. And setting arbitrary numbers like at this age, you'll get this, at this age, you'll get this. I have 5 kids. I have learned that age is not going to be the same for all of my kids.
Totally. I mean, the number one question I get is, my kid is blank years old. How much screen time should I have?
Yeah.
And first of all, screen time in and of itself is a very problematic concept.
Yes, and I want to talk about that.
And we can talk about that.
Yeah.
But this idea that age should determine your access is also flawed. Every kid is different. My daughter was able to demonstrate healthy technology use in some areas and not others. And so in those areas where she wasn't, we scaled back and said, you're not in trouble. You've just shown that you're not ready for this level of responsibility yet. We're going to pull that back and we'll try again later. With my son, it was very different things, right? It has to be aligned to the responsibility of the child. For each of our kids, and I recommend every family does this, and I actually share this in my book. I shared the contract that we have. We have a technology contract that we sign with each of our kids. And it's just an agreement, a signed agreement for what the expectations are for technology use in our family. And it's tailored to each individual kid, right? And we update it, every year, kind of around their birthday. But, one of the things that we do for our younger kids is in there we say, you can take pictures, but you can't send any picture without showing it to a parent first, right? And then after a while, we go, okay, you can send pictures as long as they're not of people. And then after a while, we see that they're doing that responsibly. And we talk about what it means to be responsible. We say, hey, now you can send pictures as long as it's to family, just to family, right? And then by the time they get to high school, we say, all right, we trust you to send pictures because you've demonstrated your ability to know what's appropriate and what's not.
Yeah. We can't know everything that's going on. And that can feel scary. I think that feeds into that fear again. How do we help that transition of like going on? How do we know they're doing a good job?
I think one of the things that we need to do is just be better at having conversations.
Okay.
There's a lot of questions that we can ask. One of the questions that I like to ask for older kids, right? Who are the people that you follow and why? What makes you follow these people? What do you like about them? What's uplifting about them? And you can do this in fun ways. Who are some people that I should follow? Recommend some people that I should follow, right? That's a very empowering question to ask our kids. Another question would be, have you ever posted something or shared something online somewhere and then found out that what you shared wasn't true? How'd you handle that? What should I do when I have a situation like that, right? It's great when there are moments when parents make mistakes because we can then say, hey, kind of screwed this up. How would you respond, right? These are great ways that we can model having those conversations with our kids. Be curious. I think the challenge is that parents don't spend enough time being curious about their kids' digital lives. Why do you like this game? What is it that's interesting about this game? Can you show me how it works?
Right. And I'd like to go back to the idea of screen time limits.
Yeah. So let me start by saying the good thing is that parents recognize that we need some limits to amount of technology use, which is healthy. We know that, right? We want kids to have balance. And often they turn to the clock. Say, you get 2 hours of screen time a day or an hour of screen time a day. We want to be teaching our kids that every digital activity has a different value that we could assign to it, right? And, there are some activities that shouldn't deserve 5 minutes because they don't give you value. Yeah. Playing a mindless game, there's very little value. Doing those for 2 hours is not a healthy decision, right? There are other digital activities where doing 2 hours would be totally reasonable. If I'm creating, if I'm designing, if I'm, making a movie, if I'm reading in virtual spaces, if I'm, connecting with family. And the funny thing is, again, if you think about this is what we do in other parts of our kids' lives. So I used, eating as an example before. Let's go back to that. Could you imagine if we had food time, right? So between 6 and 7 o'clock at night is food time, and you could eat Doritos for the full hour, but as long as you stopped eating at 7, you were good. Like, no, of course we wouldn't do that, right? We would say that we should eat healthy food. And again, could we have a few Doritos? Yeah, maybe. But really, we want to be eating healthy foods. And it's far more important what we're eating than how long we're eating for. And let's just take this example another step farther. I want my kids to recognize when they're full. I want them to recognize because their body is telling them, I've had enough, not because a timer goes off, right? That is debilitating them. Could you imagine them stuffing my face? And then the only way that I know to stop is because the timer goes off. And when I talk to kids, when I do like assemblies and talk to kids, I often ask them that question. I was like, how can you tell you're full? And they're like, well, I feel like my stomach sort of starts to get heavy and I start to feel like I've been sitting here too long or I can't eat anymore. I say, okay, great. How do you know when you're full of a particular digital activity? And they'll say, yeah, I can feel my brain sort of starting to starting to get a little fuzzy, or I feel like I've just been sitting here a little too long, right? If you help model this, they can recognize what feeling full of a digital activity looks like. And that is far more beneficial of a lesson than to teach them that time is what we should be using to limit.
Yeah, it makes me think of a specific time with my son. He was sitting in a hammock on a screen, and I had, checked in on him a couple times. And finally, I was just like, you are still on the screen after I've asked you to stop. I go over there and he shows me this incredible animation he has just made.
Yeah.
He was having this intensely creative time making something beautiful. And I realized if he had been sitting there at his desk making a painting or a drawing, I would have been so pleased. I would have praised him for that.
Yeah.
And instead, he got this negative reaction. Yeah.
And this is there's something deeper here that I think we need to talk about, which is this idea of when we're talking about building healthy digital skills, any skills, whether it's good eating habits, whether it's learning a language, whether it's learning to play the piano, right? Any skills that we want to learn require practice. It's the only way that we can learn something. And you can't practice not doing something. I encourage parents, instead of saying, don't spend so much time on that screen, don't play that game again. Instead, state the thing you would rather the kid be doing. We miss you. We haven't had a chance to interact with you today. Can you spend some time interacting with your family, right? Or I've noticed you haven't had any exercise today. Can we take a little bit of a break from that and get some exercise? Families who recognize that they can create the digital culture they want have really awesome, powerful, family culture in virtual spaces. I walked into my son's room the other day and he had been playing a game that wasn't providing a whole lot of value to him. And he'd been doing it for several hours. And I walked in and I just said, how you doing on the balance today? And he just hands me my phone and he goes, yeah, you got me, right? That's okay. So did he figure it out, himself in advance? No. But when I called him out on it, was he immediately like, yep, I got it. I'm out of balance, right? That's the first step of this. We call it out. And then over time, you get to a point where our kids are able to just recognize it on their own.
Well, and I like that because the categories that you give of digital citizenship give us the vocabulary to have those conversations and to use those words and have that be a common part of the way we talk about our digital use with our kids, and our own.
That's right. And I do think that's an important shift too, because I think one of the things that really is frustrating to me about the sort of online safety conversations is that a lot of it feels frankly pretty selfish, right? You watch out for you and you keep yourself safe and you keep right. And we, obviously want kids to be safe, but the messaging should be, how are you helping create a safe space for others, right? How can you help make sure when somebody's being picked on that you act? That some of the research is fascinating. You see that kids, if you ask them, have they seen somebody be mistreated in a virtual space? They almost all say yes, at some point they have. And if you ask the follow-up question, did you do anything about it? The vast majority would say no. That's not because they're bad kids. It's because they haven't had the conversation about what to do, because all of our messaging is you keep you safe, not here's how you stand up. Here's how you be an upstanding digital citizen.
Yeah. And those have been some of the most beautiful conversations I've had with my kids, actually, when they've been like, oh my goodness, look at this new Instagram account that somebody just came up with at our school. It's like a confessions thing, and they're all telling secrets. This is not okay. They brought it to me and said, this is not okay. And we talked about it, like, what do you think you can do about it?
One of the most important skills that we need to teach is how to resolve a situation when something goes wrong in a virtual space. We all make mistakes. We all run into situations. We all see something we shouldn't. We all post something that we find out wasn't true. We all see somebody being mistreated at some point. And what we want is for kids to go, hey, I didn't handle this well. Can you help me figure it out? Right. And in our contracts, in our family, one of the things that we say is when things go wrong, if you come to us proactively, we're going to help you work to fix it. If you don't come to us proactively and we find out later that you've been hiding it, then the consequences get greater, because the lesson we're trying to teach is when we have a problem, we need to go to somebody that can help us make it right.
Yeah.
My son the other day posted something that probably didn't have the right, tone of voice. It's hard to read tone on text, and all of a sudden, friends are frustrated with what seemed like a snarky response, right? That was a case where, I want him to be able to come to my wife in that case and say, hey, how do we make this right? Right. And have her feel like she can help him do it. And again, because he's doing that, I'm not worried about his tech use. I'm not worried about how he's going to do when he leaves home and goes to college next year, because we've practiced these things over and over again since he was at a young age.
That makes so much sense. Now, one of the things I loved about your book was all the examples you gave of great ways to connect with your family using tech. Can you give us some of those examples?
There are ways that we can use technology to engage. My mom is a retired BYU professor, lives in Utah. We live in Washington, D.C. She would read to our kids over Zoom, right? We found that it's important to give our kids responsibilities around digital curation of our family. So I'm the guy who goes on vacation and I don't ever take a picture. I don't take a picture of anything. And I'm like, man, I wish we had pictures. I don't think my brain doesn't work that way. And so one of the things that we've told our kids, part of their device use agreements, is when we're traveling, when we're doing family things, we expect you to help curate those moments. Take some pictures, record some audio, record some video. That's an example. Here's another one. So in our family, we have a shared notepad on all of our devices. And throughout the year, anytime somebody says something goofy, right? So one of our kids says something just wild, somebody writes it down and we just keep a log of it. And then at the end of the year, we sit down and we go through all of those. And our Christmas card is the best of that we then send out, every year. And so thinking about what are ways that we can use technology to help strengthen our family engagement and build family memories, I think that's really important and something to consider when you're deciding what your family digital culture is going to be about.
Oh, and I'm so glad you brought up digital culture, because that was one of the quotes that I loved in your book. So you say, teaching digital citizenship in our families is not about creating a checklist, but creating a culture. And I loved that quote so much. Can you talk for a minute just about that culture aspect?
Yeah. So every family has things that are funny in your family that you laugh at, things that are not funny that you don't laugh at, things that we care about and want to sacrifice and work for, the quirky things that make you unique, right? All of that also exists in how we show up in our virtual spaces, how we use technology in our families. And so we need to be thoughtful about what do we find funny in virtual spaces? What media do we as a family just think is really entertaining? What media is not funny? What are activities that we as a family participate in virtual spaces? What are activities that we just choose not to do, right? Those are all parts of your digital culture. And we shouldn't be haphazard in our digital culture. We should decide and be very clear. Here's what we want to be. Here's the type of people we want to be in virtual spaces. Here's what we want to be known for. That's a good question to ask. What do you want to be known for in a virtual space? And it's okay to take device breaks just to take a break. One of the things that I worry is sometimes the only time a kid ever doesn't have their device is when they're in trouble. So something that we've put in our device agreements with our family is that periodically we may just decide that it's time to take a device break. You're not necessarily in trouble. You haven't necessarily done anything wrong. We're just going to say, hey, we're just going to take a little bit of a break. And so we want to teach them that it's okay to take device breaks, and that if you do, it's not necessarily because you're in trouble. That's all part of what we've created as part of our family's digital culture. And context matters too. So, what is okay when I'm on a 10-hour car ride and we've already sung every song we can think of and we're just bored and trying to not, kill each other for a while, right? You know what? Play some games, right? Just chill for a little bit there. That's very different than what would be a good, a valuable digital activity on a beautiful day when you're at home and your friends want to go play outside, right? And so context of what's going on also determines the type of activities that would be appropriate or not.
This has been so great. The problem's going to be figuring out what to do first.
In the book, I probably give 100 suggestions. At the end, I think sometimes I have parents that are like, oh my gosh, there's so much. You pick a couple things, right? Pick one or two things. I suggest starting with the family technology agreements that we've talked about. That's a really simple way to start. Just outline some expectations, some norms for technology use. Easy way to start.
Right. You can't build a new culture in a day, right? Thank you for listening to the Y Magazine podcast. You can look for new episodes on the first Thursday of each month. This episode is based on the article Mind the App by Sara Atwood in the winter 2025 issue of Y Magazine. If you'd like to listen to more episodes with great parenting advice, check out How to Help Kids Love Reading with BYU Professor Paul Ricks, Artful Parenting, How to Make Creativity Part of Your Family Culture, and Making Peace, How to Mediate Conflict in Our Families. This episode was produced by me, Whitney Archibald, with executive producer Brooklyn Romer and editing help from Abby Phelan Horsepool. Original music mixing and mastering by Jarrett Davis.